when you combine change management, behavior change, sales persuasion, and leadership, the outcome is influence.
Welcome to the Grant Wise Show. This podcast helps ordinary real estate agents build extraordinary companies. Let's grow in 3, 2. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grant Wise Show. Excited for my guest today, somebody who I have admired from afar for quite some time. We've worked in similar circles, and I've always appreciated the work that he's done. His name is René Rodriguez. He's the author of Amplify Your Influence, which is a Wall Street Journal bestseller. He's known by many as a keynote speaker, a leadership advisor, and a transformational speaker coach. What I find the most fascinating about René is that for the last 27 years, he's been researching and applying behavioral neuroscience to solve some of the toughest challenges in leadership, sales, and change. René, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast with me, man.
It's my honor. I've heard wonderful things about you, and your name always comes up in all the circles. And so it's everybody says, you got to get with Grant. You got to get with Grant. So it's good to finally meet and to do this with you.
I could not agree more, man. I really appreciate that. I was talking to you pre-show, right? The purpose of the podcast here is to help ordinary people understand how to build extraordinary companies. And I definitely view you as somebody that has developed extraordinary influence in the space. I know, which is a huge topic for you, but tell us the story. How did you get to where you are today?
Oh man, it's been, what do they call those? A 30-year overnight success. And I even saying success because I feel like I'm just getting started. It's like this, once you feel like the places that you didn't think you'd be at, you're there, but then you realize this is not even near where I want to be. And then there's always something else. And so I say that in a sense of, it's been a 30-year exploration of what ways I can bring value to the marketplace. And, and how do I do that in a way that serves the mission that I believe in and utilizes the skills that I have. And so I started selling cookware door to door in college after I got cut from the basketball team. And I started doing that because one of my mentors gave me this piece of advice. He said, if you learn how to sell, you'll always be employed. And so I took the first sales job that came my way, and that happened to be cookware. So I realized that it wasn't going to be any harder than getting cut from a basketball team that you devoted 15 years of your life to at that age. And so, they gave me a pretty simple formula: 10 presentations, you close 3. And I was like, so if I just get to 10 today, I can close 3. He said, well, ideally, yeah. I mean, technically, yeah. I said, so if I do 10 every day, I can close 3 of them. He was like, well, you have to make time and eat and things like that. I'm like, but the concept works. He's like, yes. I said, okay. So I just literally thought of it from that perspective of how fast can I get to 10? And, when I realized that was the case, and in the journey of a true sales professional, there's so many skill sets that have to come from that. One of them is presentation skills. And you have to be able to learn how to create and present value in the context of a situation where people are used to spending nothing or very cheap. Cookware was something you as a hand-me-down, $50, at Target. And here we're charging $2,500 to $5,000. And so it was a really interesting process to do that. And with, last guy to make a sale because my mom was out of town, and then she bought the sympathy set. And of course I made my first sale and realized then that I was hooked. This was something that you couldn't get cut from. If you just closed the deal, you wouldn't be cut. And it was a pretty cool realization. And so that I did that while I was going to school for behavioral neuroscience at the University of St. Thomas, and then went to work for a change management consulting firm that used brain research to navigate hostile work environments and change. And that was interesting because I started realizing that there was a change component to life and the resistance to change, and different arenas had resistance. And, I was a salesperson, so I was dealing with buyer resistance and booking appointments and generating leads and prospecting. And then you had to present. Now I'm dealing with unions and people that are resistant from a different place, but yet neurologically the same exact response. And so I saw the same thing happen in 2 different scenarios. And, learning how to work and create work environments and manage and bridge communications and resolve conflict and all of those different elements really gave me an insight to the reality of human behavior under stress. And we did that we were doing 55 workshops a month. So we saw a lot of people, over close to 200,000 people trained. And the journey through that led me to sort of find my own way of understanding what it was that I was doing. And when you combine change management, behavior change, sales persuasion, and leadership, the outcome is influence. That is the one central focus that we all have in common. And just did a talk for and a podcast for a group that's the my environmental health and safety. I just spoke at the National Speakers Association yesterday. Did their keynote. So there's so many different arenas that we play in, but also spoke at Gold Bar, which would have been a huge real estate event with Ryan Serhant and Josh Altman and some other really all the celebrity agents, right? And so I've been in your industry for 21 years, probably speaking to it. So, but bringing outside perspectives to it, which has been fun.
Definitely. And I've known that quite a few people that you've worked with, part of your resume obviously is that of a transformational speaker coach. And I've had, I don't know how many people say that working with you did what, you had set out to, right? Help them transform their ability to speak. How do we apply that? Maybe, I mean, everybody speaks in this industry, whether you're speaking from a stage or you're speaking in a listing presentation. What are the things that people really must pay attention to, going back to presentation skills sets, which was something that you developed early on? What are some of the most critical components to having success with that in real estate?
Well, I think that people need to understand that the stage, is a scary place, right? All eyes are on you, watching every word that you say, every movement you make, just to see if you're going to add value. And if you don't, they will quickly tell you that you're not adding value. But that's not the only stage. Like you said, the stage is every face-to-face interaction, every phone call, every listing presentation, every prospecting. You're walking down the street, waking up and showing up and walking into an event. That's a stage. Anytime you're being watched and observed in a potential influence environment where you have to self-promote or you have to make some sort of impact, that's a stage. And sometimes it's a phone call. And when you realize that those are all moments of influence, you start taking a look at all of the nuances within that and all of the small, tiny little opportunities to make minor shifts to move your influence further. And, there's a lot of people talking about influence and manipulation, and there's a huge difference between the two. And to be clear, manipulation is the use of persuasion and influence tools to an extreme and at the expense of someone else, typically done underhandedly, so you don't know what's happening. Influence is a blatant use of every tool you have to influence ethically, but for the betterment of both parties and done out in the open. There's no reason to hide your intent to influence. And so we're really clear on those elements. And so when you think about how, speaking and presenting, the mortgage and real estate industry has been something that really, people call it a listing presentation, but very little of it is actually answering the question that the client has. And it hasn't had to. Gary Keller in their book was really good at pointing out that 81% of buyers go with their first or second home buyer, and like 92% of sellers, or 82 and 91, one of those numbers. And so that you're either number one or number two and you get the deal. So it even had very little to do with your presentation ability. So then now your presentation extends into your personal brand, how you show up in your social media, what your website looks like, all of those things all extend into that. And then when you get to somebody, when we're not in sort of this low interest rate environment where, we had an abundance of homes, we had to think of what was the value proposition. Before, there was not just get in the deal as quickly as you can and get them in the home. Now we got to be able to help people think differently and outside the box. That is a requirement for presentation because you're presenting a new idea. And so body language, sequencing, timing, voice inflection, so many aspects go into the skill set of presentation, but we like to add in with the objective of influence, which then creates its own nuance.
Behavioral science is something that absolutely fascinates me. I think if I were to go back to college, I dropped out of college, I think, second semester. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time in school, didn't really thrive in that type of an environment. But if I could go back today, if I wanted to, I would go back and study psychology because I think human behavior is one of the most fascinating things to study. But I think it's maybe something I've fallen in love with because it is so intermingled within the confines of sales, advertising, marketing. How much of what you learned going through and studying those things do you really use pretty intentionally every day with what it is that you do or that you're teaching other people to do today?
So much. One is it teaches you how to study. I was taught how to research, how to read abstracts and studies and experiments and experimental design, and looking at Z scores and T scores from a statistical perspective to see what was valid and what wasn't, being able to read between the lines. And so there was that, but then there's also philosophy, which was really critical. I think philosophy is such a critical component to understand and ask deeper, tough questions where the ethics come into play. And so, I am a fan of school. I know that school has gone down kind of a bad rap right now, and school has become a less and less of a need for success in life. But say, I was standing on a bridge. I said, well, I sure hope the person who built this bridge went to school. And that doctor that's going to work on my children, I hope they went to school. And, but, yet I also told my son, I'm like, and school's not a requirement because there's a million jobs out there. You don't have to go to school to be in sales. You don't have to go to school to be so many different things and entrepreneur and all those things. But if you have the skill sets, or if you don't like to have the skill sets, school can do something good. But for me, it was it was really about how to research and how to find things. And so that discipline and that basic foundational understanding of the neuroscience and how the brain functions created a really strong platform for me to go out and continue my learning after college. And so it was critical for me.
When you are working in these markets or within the real estate market, the lending space today, how are you advising people use these different things? I think what a lot of people might equate this to today, right, is emotional intelligence. This seems to be like the buzzword or the key thing that everybody, you need to have a high sense of EQ, emotional intelligence. What does that mean? Like, how are we using this today? The way that we carry ourselves, present ourselves.
1995, we received about 15 packages in the mail. All of those packages were a Time magazine cover, and it said on the cover, "What's your EQ?" That was when Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, came out, and it became popular. Now, that was 1995. That concept was created by Peter Salovey and his partner years even prior to that. So it's so fascinating to know. And they sent it to us because we had been doing that work for years already. And it was interesting to see now, it's become sort of the norm in the lexicon of business. But emotional intelligence is really three basic things. First is a sense of self-awareness of how you're feeling. If you don't have any self-awareness and realize that you might be upset or that you might, be giving off a signal of some sort, self-awareness is one of the cornerstones of emotional intelligence. The second part is also empathy, to understand and read how somebody else might be feeling. And so now you understand how you feel. I can see how they're feeling. The third component is skill sets to adjust your behavior to best meet that scenario. And all three of those combine to create somebody who's emotionally intelligent, which is a far better indicator of someone's success in life. And so, there used to be IQ, your intellectual quotient, but there's a single research study out there that shows your intellect is going to be directly correlated to your income. And most of the C students are the ones that are running the business, and they have to hire the A students to leading the business, to hire the A students to do the work like, accounting or legal or HR. And those are the A students, but they don't run the business. And so it really showed and kind of gave people a new look at what intelligence meant. And so now in leadership and in influence, I have a whole chapter, I think it's my second chapter, is around self-awareness. And within that is, it's a cornerstone for emotional intelligence. And so you have to be able to know and have that sense of emotional intelligence and empathy and self-awareness, along with discipline skills, to be able to truly, truly be effective, especially in a market like today.
Salespeople are not notoriously dynamic. We talk a lot about, I think the industry talks a lot about scripts and dialogues and those different types of things, which is, I think, important to understand. I'm not a huge fan of, scripts per se, somebody giving you a 13-page document and you need to program this to memory. I'm a much greater fan of asking really good questions and, managing the conversation so that the person on the other side is selling themselves. But would you say that it is just as, if not more important, to learn how to identify the emotional cues in conversations, the way that people are actually feeling, maybe because that may not always directly correlate to what they're saying, Would you argue that these things are more important to understand in sales than even things like scripts and those other types of things that people push out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's two pieces of it. That one is a lot of people demonize scripts. And what they don't like about scripting is they don't want to sound scripted. And so sounding scripted is very different than being scripted. When I do a podcast, there are certain things that I've said, dozens of times. It sort of come out and it is a script. There's certain scripts that I've read that I go, wow, that's a really nice way of addressing that. And that's kind of in the beauty of the thing, especially if you're dealing in sales, somebody who's new, they have to learn by scripting and say, well, find your way through it and listen. Well, there's a science to selling, and there's a beautifully written script will walk you through that. And the more you practice that script, the more it becomes ingrained to you because there's a sense of sequence to it. There's a nuance that you start understanding, and you're practicing a path of something that works before you make it yours. And then there's the delivery and the art form that comes in. How do I make this sound great? How do I not sound scripted? And when I used to be scripted, I would say, you know what, I'm learning a new process here. So I did write down what I want to say. And so if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of follow these notes along here. And, in a transparent world, people really respect that, especially if you're new. And I remember selling cookware. I'd have a prospectus, which I'd flip, there was a picture there, and the notes were for me on the backside of it. And I would, TP the book so I could see my notes and they could see the presentation. And I would tell them, at first I was trying to hide the fact that I was reading. And then because I was super nervous. And then I finally just said, you know what? Started realizing that there was, when they found out I was reading, they were so nice about it. They'd be like, you know what, Renee, it's okay. You're doing great. And then I'm like, oh, wow. So I'm not being offensive by reading. And then I started just saying, you know what? I would just start saying that in the beginning, say, I'm a little bit new at this. I'll be, 10 weeks in. I'm still a little bit new at this. So I'm a little practice. So if I get a little nervous, I apologize. I've got my notes in the back. And that would just lower the level of tension in the room. And they'd be like, you're doing great. Don't worry. If I make a mistake, they'd be, complimentary. But then I started realizing that there was something really, really fascinating about just being transparent in that. So, but you're also equally important point, which is you have to be able to read the room and ebb and flow with the energy. You have to be able to really pick up on buying signals and the other nuances that might not be as explicit. And so then how do you, make a shift in that? I literally went to do a keynote yesterday for the National Speakers Association, and I had this all written out. And this is, you have to understand, like when you speak to NSA, you're speaking to a room full of professional speakers that are also notorious for being very cruel in their reviews. And so here I am, I'm going, okay. And I had this plan. And when I got up there, I started on that plan, but then something hit me about who they really were and what they would find valuable. And I just made a shift. And nobody knew it, but it was a complete shift in what my intention was. Now, I still covered a lot of the elements, but there was, say, 50% of it was what I was not intending on covering. But it made sense to ebb and flow with the buying, not the buying signals, but the feedback and the engagement that I was getting with the audience and just how much this was resonating. I said, okay, you know what? If this is resonating, I do know this is important to them. Let me go a little bit deeper. And, we ended up getting a standing ovation. So I don't think I would have gotten it if I would have stuck to my guns.
How do you tell that? You say something shifted and you changed. So take us a little deeper here. How do you tell that you should make that change?
So a simple one would be a point that I think is a nuance and not even a nuance. It's something that I think is sort of elementary or something that I don't think they're going to be interested in. And you hear them either laugh really hard, sigh, take notes, ask a bunch of questions, and you sometimes see these comments of like, wow, yes, in the audience. I'm like, oh my God, you know, something. You just hear these moments where they kind of pinpoint you dropped a bomb of some sort, like a positive bomb, right? A good one. And you hear enough of those cues, you start realizing something's resonating. If you do enough groups too, there is an intuition that's built. Hard to explain, but you're picking up on the energy, which is the cumulative set of cues that you're getting. And so, like, if you're, I walk the room trying to feel what's going on. And then I also will get off stage so I can get past those lights that are in your eyes and you can see the whites of their eyes and you start seeing the smiles and the engagement and the notes. And you start realizing, okay, maybe there is something to this. And that to me is the energy. It's all of the cumulative behaviors, the questions and the noises and the sounds. And, that's why energy is such an interesting topic because how do you point it out? It just takes being present to what's going on, listening and having massive empathy for everybody in that room so that you can make the right choice.
Do you mind explaining that a little bit more? Because when people are listening to this, I think empathy is sometimes mixed up emotionally with other people. They have a misunderstanding of what it actually is. Why is that so important to have empathy in your sales conversations when you're speaking from stage, when you're out there doing what a lot of us are doing, trying to gain more influence? Why is that such a critical piece?
Well, let's answer it really simply. Do people buy based on emotion or logic?
Emotion.
Emotion. We all know that.
Hmm.
And I always talk to people, I'll ask the group, how deeply do you know it? Really deeply. I say, great. I bet you, if I were to look at your presentations, would they be emotionally driven or would they be product driven, features and benefit driven? And I said, so if my client is making an emotional decision, well, emotional intelligence is about the empathy to understand what emotion they're in. If I don't understand what emotion they're in, how in the world am I going to pick up if they're buying what I'm putting down, picking up what I'm putting down? And so it's at the core of that, of being able to understand whether or not they're buying into this idea. And I use the word idea because sometimes the idea is the use of this product. Sometimes the idea is to switch companies and work for me. Sometimes the idea is to give a concession. So it's the idea is what we're trying to persuade or the influence objective. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, and I have another question based off that. In real estate and in lending and a lot of other industries for that matter, it's a very what some people would think logic driven space. It's all data and numbers and rates and all these other things. But what you said is true. People make decisions with emotion, they validate them with logic. How do you typically coach people to tell a story out of data so that we're actually impacting people emotionally?
One of the best data aggregators out there, a dear friend and mentor we just lost recently, Mr. Steve Harney, who is the founder and CEO of Keeping Current Matters. And if you're aware of what Keeping Current Matters is, it's the there. Are you familiar with Keeping Current Matters?
Yeah.
And so, and you're aware we lost Steve a few days ago, right? He was a very close mentor, and one of the things that I would do with is take his current research and say, how do we build a story around this? And so, one of like the elements of taking into consideration, well, let's even back up even further. Okay, data and research is a logical decision, but the story and the narrative that goes around the data is where we derive the value. Somebody can present a piece of data and put a narrative that it's negative. Some people can put a story, like somebody can say, okay, well, interest rates are low or high. Well, there could be a narrative, and that's a bad time to buy, because it's going to be more expensive. Well, what if we were saying this is the best time to buy because rates are high? And people are like, that's counter to the narrative out there. I said, well, think about it. When rates were low, you also had two other factors that were at play. You had multiple offers on a house. And what would that do to the price of the house? Go up. So you get a lower interest rate on a more expensive home. Now you're locked into a home. You aren't technically really locked into a rate. You can change that by restructuring it. And so right now is the time to buy when rates aren't as low as they were before because it's pushed a lot of people out of the market, bringing some of the home prices to be at least more competitive. You're not getting into a multiple offer such scenario. And I said, so that's one way of sort of controlling the narrative through logic, but yet the logic is pretty clear. And then I go, but the other piece, let's really think about this for a minute. Grant, so pretend that you're looking at buying the home and you want to wait it out a little bit. I said, Grant, I said, in your current home, can you share with me one of your favorite memories?
Yeah, that would be. It would have to be my son walking around the house, just laughing uncontrollably at literally anything.
So just walking around laughing. I love that. Yeah, those are priceless moments. And what was it about that moment that was so special?
I think what made it special was just recognizing that we only get those moments for so long. He's only gonna be so young, right? He's only gonna, laugh uncontrollably for so long. Maybe hopefully not, but I think recognizing that I won't get that for a huge chunk of my life. I only get it for a little bit of time is what made it so special.
Yeah. So being truly present and full of gratitude in that moment. I don't have that specific memory. So Grant, I'd like to buy that moment from you. Would you sell it to me for $10,000?
Yeah, of course not.
20,000. Would you sell it to me?
Yeah, no. No.
100,000.
Yeah, no, it's priceless.
Priceless, right? So here's why I bring that up. Is like here's $100,000. And I'm assuming this is your own home. And now this new home that you're looking at, from what you told me, it has that kitchen that allows you to now cook for your family while you can see them instead of them being in another room. You also told me that it has that closet that when you walk in there, you said you feel like $1,000,000, and you and I both know in the work that we need to feel good every day. But I think the part that really struck me was the backyard that you can now host your entire family versus you had to be picky about it. And I said, so I'm going to assume that in this new home, you're going to have a collection of those priceless memories. And so, and you just told me a minute ago that that one memory, and I know there was a lot more, you wouldn't sell it for $100,000, probably even $1,000,000. But yet we're worried about a little bit of an increase in price on the interest rate. I said, so if that's the case, and if this new home provides the potential for those new memories that you say are also priceless, if they don't, then what I'm saying is not valid. But if it is, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball on what this is really about. This isn't an interest rate decision because interest rates is one decision. Home value is another one, and they don't correlate. And so we know for the next 5 years to 7 years that home values are going to go up. This is the current interest rate that we're at right now that allows you to get into the game, that to experience the growth on that equity, but more importantly, create the new memories. And you said it yourself. How many more of these years do we have left? I know for myself, I don't have many summers left. When I say that many, it's not like 2 or 3. Like, what if I have 20 or 30 summers left? I'm 48 that I can truly enjoy. And for you to be able to recognize that at an early age, I think that's a big win. And so if that's the case, I think let's keep our eye on the ball and let's get you into this home. And then when the interest rates come up, trust me, we've got somebody here that is paid to tell us when that interest rate comes down, and we will make sure that we take care of that and restructure the loan. So you see how that process was full of logic, but it was also full of emotion. And the way that I did it was in a very credible manner, but also said, hey, if what I'm saying is not true, then stay in your home. It allows them to opt into that. So it's not manipulative. That's legitimate. If what I'm saying is not there, you got a great interest rate on a home that you're happy with, then don't move. But if there's a delta between where you are right now and where you want to be, and you think those memories will far outweigh an extra $200 or $150 a month, I think you cut your eyes off the ball.
Fantastic. A masterclass, my friend, in how to really inject narrative, I think, into a lot of what's going on in today's marketplace, which is a skill set that, if you're a real estate agent listening to this, is one worth acquiring. I want to respect your time, Renee. It's one more question. If I'm an agent listening to this, or my team leader listening to this, and I'm all in on, taking my level of influence to the next level, what do I do next?
Well, aside from taking my course, that would be a very good decision to make. It's where we make a lot of transformation, but we also provide a lot of free options. Our podcast is free. The book is $20. We offer a monthly mentorship program that you get your first month for free. And that mentorship program brings myself along with one time a month, and then another time a month would be with a guest coach. And I've got some pretty cool friends, people that a lot of people pay a lot of money to go see, that will join this coaching call and mentorship program. So those are those pieces. But if you don't have the money, if you can't do those things, get out there and speak as often as you can and record it. Record it, because then if you walk back, most of us are pretty astute when it comes to understanding if we like body language or if we don't. You may not be able to pinpoint exactly what it is, but at least you'll have a sense of what you like and what you don't like. And you can keep doing what you like, try to shift what you don't like. That's a great place to start, and you can make a massive impact on that.
Yeah, we all need to go out there and get up to the plate, have at bats, and just learn. One of my favorite things in a lot of the training stuff that we do is learn, implement, and grow. So you've learned something, go implement it, and then grow from it. I think it's just a lot of great advice from Renee, and I expected nothing less. So I appreciate you. I know you're a very busy man, taking the time to help people understand how they could go from ordinary to extraordinary. This was very impactful for me, and I know it will be for the audience too. So I appreciate you for being on the show today, man.
It's my pleasure and an honor. I appreciate it. Thank you, Grant.
Of course, of course. Thank you all for continuing to listen to the Grant Wise Show. I know you got a lot of notes from this. Make sure you leave a review for this episode and DM me on Instagram. Ask me your best questions. Let's make sure that we keep the conversation going. I'll see you on the next one. Stay wise. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Grant Wise Show. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.